Welcome to the DTS Fitness Education podcast. I'm Ben McDonald and I'm here with my main man, my main Irish mate from the Emerald Isle, Mr. Ben Pratt. How are you, my mate?
Hey, Ben, it's great to be with you. It's nice for you to finally return the favor and bring me onto your podcast, huh?
Exactly. I did a podcast with Ben, mate, and we was talking before. That was like over a year ago. That is crazy.
Time flies, buddy. It really flies.
It certainly does, my friend. And we were saying, like, is it because you're having fun, or is it because you've got numerous kids who are just like, not got time to sit down? Do you know what I mean?
Probably a bit of both, I would hope. But the kids certainly make things fly quick, that's for sure.
Brilliant. Okay, then. We are going to get cracking. We're going to get straight into it, my friend. So, question number one. What's the best way to get lean? That's dropping body fat, and it's your opinion and thought process, Ben.
It's going to have to be, for sure, I think, on this question. There's so many factors, so many elements, I think, that go into helping somebody to get lean. I don't think that we can necessarily just create a list of this, and this is the answer. The reality is that there needs to be an approach for each person. And in order to do that, we obviously need to know the member, the client, whoever it is we're working with. We need to know them really well to be able to understand the various factors that are a problem in their life and the factors that are strengths in their life. So I wish I could just go, it's this and it's this for everybody, but I don't believe that it is. I believe that there will be a range of factors, and depending on the person's current lifestyle, habits, behaviors, will change the priority of that. To try to help give you some answer, let's start to pick on some of the big rocks that I think matter. There's no doubt in my mind that diet and exercise clearly are important to help somebody to get lean and to help someone be healthy. And the way that I tend to look at it, Ben, is that I prefer to focus on helping someone optimize their health, and the leanness comes as a byproduct. Too often, I think we get down to these smaller factors and forget to look at the big picture, such as we look at calorie deficit, or we look at hormonal balance, or we look at the amount of exercise for calorie expenditure. And we get into these smaller elements and forget to step back and go, hang on a minute, what is driving those behaviors in the first place? What things get in the way of those good behaviors happening, and what things are in place to help support those behaviors continually happening. Consistency in behavior, I think, is such a key factor in ensuring that leanness happens. So I've just thrown the whole thing on the table there. Is there anything you want to delve into before I go any further?
Mate, there's loads of stuff, really. But I think, what do you think? What is your thought process when it comes to calories in, calories out? And then that exercise and energy expenditure component? Okay,
sure. All right. No, I'm trying to think what's the best way I can explain this. Let's first of all talk about calories in, all right? Obviously, there's been lots and lots of studies over the years that have looked at this idea of the more calories we take in, the more that is associated with rising body weight and obesity. There's no doubt about it. That we have to consider here is that often in those studies, what is not looked at is what are the driving behaviors. Is it the calorie intake that's causing obesity, or is there other things that are driving calorie intake and therefore leading to obesity? Studies that we look at are associations. They don't tell us the cause. They just say that when calorie intake goes up, obesity levels and overweight levels go up. So there's no doubt that those things are linked, but is one driving the other necessarily, or is there another thing behind the calorie intake that might be driving that? Now, to get into that a little bit, one thing I would say is that our appetite, our cravings, are certainly a factor in how much we eat. If we don't sustain eating habits that switch off appetite and tell our brain, our nervous system, and our hormones that we are satisfied and full, then we're going to seek more foods on a regular basis. It's easier to increase our calorie intake because we're starting to respond to biological drivers rather than just making the conscious decision to eat more or eat less. In my experience, most people who eat too much are eating too much in a much more subconscious level. They're not really thinking about it. They're not going out planning to overeat that day. It's just happening because they're responding to the various behavioral and biological drivers that they're being stimulated by. So a great example of this would be, let's say somebody doesn't sleep well, okay? They've had a bad night's sleep. Maybe they got kids like me, you know, and they wake up pretty jaded the next day. Well, there's pretty good research to show that that is going to change the hormones in their body. For example, it's going to drive up the hormone ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone that makes us seek out more rewarding foods that are high in calories, such as sugary and fatty foods. And it's also going to lower our leptin levels, which is a hormone that tells our brain that we're satisfied. So a bad night's sleep, ghrelin goes up, leptin comes down, and what do we end up with? We end up with increased appetite, higher levels of cravings, and a physiological drive to consume more. On average, one night of partial sleep deprivation might increase our caloric intake maybe 300 to 400 calories the next day, typically from those poor quality foods.
Mate, and that's significant, eh? 300 to 400 calories, he says, significant increase.
It certainly is, and that's just from one night. So
how long would you have to run on a treadmill, Ben, at like full speed?
Right, that's a good run, that is. We're looking at a good half an hour probably to burn that back off, you know. But when you think about that, yes, caloric intake has gone up, and we could say, sure, calorie intake has gone up, therefore they're going to gain weight. But I'd be looking at that going, hang on a minute, what was the driver? The driver was the hormones. The hormonal change caused them to eat more. Well, what changed the hormones? It was the lack of sleep. So actually, the cause is sleep drove up the hormones the wrong way. The hormones caused the increase in appetite and seeking out sweet foods, and then we ate more. So I think sometimes when we focus only on calories, we're looking a fair ways down the river rather than looking back up to the source to say, well, what caused that? And there's a number of other things that we can look at like that bring about those changes in appetite and behavior. Stress is another big one. If we're constantly under chronic stress, that affects hormonal balance, which can affect appetite and cravings. And also, if we exercise, I mean, how many of us have heard the phrase that you go to work up an appetite? You know, there's absolutely no doubt when we increase caloric expenditure, we start to train harder and do more, we are going to feel hungrier because our body is trying to restore the lost energy. So all of those things are not independent of one another. If I'm not sleeping well, I have a stressful job, and I'm trying to train, all of those things are driving your appetite up, and unless you're being very, very mindful and you can exercise significant willpower, you're going to eat more. There's no doubt about that. And so therefore calorie balance becomes a challenge.
Mate, that's a great thought process, my mate, because it's like, flipping heck, how many people lack a little sleep, have a stressful job, and then think, I need to go and train, which is another stressor to the body. It's a physical stress. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, and then what happens is, Ben, they think the hunger levels go up. So what did he do? They grab something quick to eat, and then they beat themselves up about it, and everything goes out the window. Oh, well, I've ate that. I may as well forget about it now because we can't start a diet on a Friday, obviously. We have to start it on a Monday morning. So everything goes out the window, you know what I mean?
Sure, but then we have the other side of that, which is you got someone who's in that same scenario you've just explained, not sleeping so well. They've got kids and other priorities they have to manage. They're trying to fit their training in at the end of the day, which is often not really the best time of day because it drives your stress hormones back up, and then you get the same cycle again because high stress hormones in the evening and at night leads to poorer sleep that night, and the whole cycle repeats. So you get those kind of individuals, and then they are trying so hard to reduce their calories because that's what we're being told, because the evidence shows less calories means less body weight. So they're now in that sort of scenario, using willpower to keep their calorie levels down. And how long can that last? Willpower, unfortunately, is a finite resource. It's not infinite. We can't constantly fight back against biology. And what happens then is that people at some point crack, and then the whole thing comes tumbling down. And so we get into this scenario where people go, I've tried this so many times before and I failed. I'm so weak. And there's shame and guilt, and they beat themselves up, believing that they cannot manage their own body. But the reality is we need to learn to work with the biological system, not fight against it all the time. And when we learn what things drive, and we begin to manage those behaviors in a more manageable, productive way that isn't just about willpower, that actually makes the whole process a bit easier. Because if we can temper the biological drives to eat by using a bit of smarts, then that makes it easier for us to keep the calorie intake down because my body's not constantly telling me to do that. And then we feel like we have more energy because I'm feeling better. I've got more energy in the system. And so to go to the gym doesn't feel so hard because I've got energy to spare. And now I can train without feeling like I'm constantly beating my body up.
Nice. No, I like that, mate. And just so the listeners are aware, you've just completely or recently released a sleep and stress management course.
A sleep course, yes. So we have released a course called the Sleep Recovery Specialist. That's right.
Sorry, Sleep Recovery Specialist, which is funny because I'm actually doing the course.
And you're being a good student. You're doing well.
Well, I try. I've never been classed as a good student, Ben. Do you know what I mean? But that's how
I'm trying to make you feel good, you know.
So I find that interesting, mate. When we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about the choices that we make, we're talking about exercise intervention and all these different components. How much, as you've just alluded to there, how much would you say sleep impacts you being lean?
Cool. That's you're trying to track me right down to like a percentage or something like that. What are you sort of saying?
No, I mean, if there's would that be an area where you'd be like, mate, let me have a look at how you're sleeping, and then we can maybe put in some thought processes from there to build you up to achieving your overall objective.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, there's four big rocks I think you have to look at when you're trying to help somebody manage body weight. You have to look at diet. You have to look at exercise. There's no doubt about that. But it seems like the next smaller things would be sleep and then stress. All right. Those are the four big rocks. But for me, it's the other way around. It's biggest rocks to look at are sleep, number one, diet, number two, then stress, then exercise. Those would be the way I would look at it in that order. If you think about sleep is something that, you know, the current recommendations across the world are that adults of any age should be getting a minimum of 7 hours of sleep up to about 9 hours as a maximum. Now, if you think about that across a 24-hour cycle, that means we're a third or thereabouts of our life is sleep. When we look at how much time people invest into diet, the reality is it's quite small, possibly somewhere in the region of about, you know, an hour per day. If we then look at exercise, if someone's training an hour every other day, well, it's about half an hour of exercise per day. So those things actually go down in terms of the amount of time physically that they're impacting our behavior. Sleep is a significant one because it impacts our daily 24-hour anything else. So for me, we have to look at that first. If someone's sleep is dialed in, then appetite is going to be dialed in. They're going to feel more restored. They're going to recover from their exercise more readily so that their body is in a better place than on the following day or the day after. Then we would look at diet because even though we only eat maybe an hour a day, actually that food is inside of us being processed and digested for some time during the day. And then I would look at exercise after that. Now, I'm not saying that exercise is the least important. I'm just saying in terms of behavioral change, exercise is not as big an impactor on weight management as people usually make out. I think there's other behaviors that are a higher address exercise because it is a great one for shaping the body, toning the body, and doing good things in terms of overall health and wellness to the body. It's clearly important. But in the exercise and weight management factor, it isn't as big as typically people are always making out.
Mate, that is an enlightening thought process. I like that. So you spoke about hormonal effects of a lack of sleep. Mm-hmm. You spoke about how it affects stress as well. You wake up a little more stressed out, feeling like you may be a little less able to cope with stuff throughout the day. Mm-hmm. What other impacts would it have as far as your nutritional choices go?
What? So having a lack of sleep?
Having a lack of sleep, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, the main thing that they've focused on is that a lack of sleep obviously is a stressor, so it impacts stress. And so the stress hormone cycle across a 24-hour day is meant to be highest in the morning, and it gradually drops down throughout the day, and it should be lowest in the first 1 to 3 hours of our sleep. So that's the normal stress cycle. And then it rises again in the morning to wake us up. So early in the morning, our stress hormones are highest, not to make us feel stressed, but to release the needed energy. Cortisol helps to release glucose and fats into the system, so we have lots of energy ready to, face the new day with vigor. However, many people, if they're feeling stressed all the time, will actually find that their hormonal cycle isn't like that. They'll wake in the morning feeling really fatigued, probably need a good coffee to get going or something like that with a big caffeine kick, because actually their cortisol is sluggish in the morning. It's lower than it should be. And so they struggle to get going. And when you're feeling tired, as anybody knows, there's two things your body wants to do. If you're fatigued, you want to eat something to put energy in, or I want to rest and sleep to restore the body.
Ah.
And if you're feeling fatigued all day long, all right, from the morning into the afternoon, you're going to feel like that during the day. I'm going to feel like I need to put energy in to restore it, or I'm going to need to take a rest. So we often see people who are chronically stressed that is what's going on. And sleep can be one of those things that feeds into that. And so in the earlier hours of the day, what we'll tend to find is people are seeking out processed carbohydrate foods or fattier foods. The cheap breakfast cereal in the morning might seem like a good thing because it's low in fat, but the reality is it's full of sugar and cheap refined carbohydrates that boost the glucose that should have already been in the system because of raised cortisol. But if cortisol levels are low in the morning, we're not getting that boost of naturally releasing glucose and fats because cortisol is sluggish. So we do what cortisol should be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that, mate. I like that. So sleep is, mate, sounds like it's a big one. So your big 4 rocks, first one was?
Sleep.
Second one was?
Diet. Third one, stress. Fourth one, exercise. Now, and a lot of people won't like that, but obviously exercise matters. Exercise matters, but I think some of those other things are behaviors that underpin the ability to do good exercise. If we're not sleeping right, if we're eating crap and we're stressed to the hilt, exercise can break you.
Yeah.
Right? It can break you. It can push you over and become one of those things that actually is damaging to the system. If I'm sleeping really clean and providing me good energy and my stress is in check because I've got a good management process in place, exercise suddenly becomes this great health elixir. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But if the big drivers behind that are not right, then exercise can be the thing that breaks the camel's back. And so we need to put those other things in place first so that exercise can be this great health elixir that helps us feel brilliant.
That's fantastic, mate. I like that. That's just spun it on its head. You've just spun it on its head, man.
Happy to help.
I don't know if that helps. But you've definitely spun it on its head. So, number 2, my mate, what have been your biggest challenges with clients and how did you overcome them?
Well, that's a good question. For me, I would say I'm probably going to go down the kind of the behavioral goal management process. So often as personal trainers or as fitness professionals, we feel our job is to tell clients how they should act, what they should do. And the longer I've been in this game, and I won't say how long that is now, but the longer I've been in this game, I've realized that actually the driver, the motivation has to come from within. It has to come from the client. And so my role then as a trainer to support that individual is more about helping them explore their motivations, explore what goals will work for them at this stage, rather than imposing goals and actions upon the individual. Because you don't get a lot of buy-in when you say to them, you need to do this and this and this in order to get your results. I would rather talk and negotiate and discuss with the client options based on analysis. So we'd analyze their needs, look at where they're at, and then try to, almost like with a map, here's point A where you're at, and this is point B. Here's all the different routes we could take to get to that point. Which of those routes look like it's a way or a method that you could actually follow? And then discuss those with the client to help them feel like they are choosing their path to get to where they want to be. I've tended to find that works much more effectively because the client gains ownership because they're agreeing and directing the path that you would like to take them to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, nice. So it becomes like a joint process rather than you dictating what it is that the client should be doing. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not something that the client can actually achieve right now. They become involved in the process, like you say, and then it becomes much more achievable and attainable for them because they feel that ownership, like what you say, Ben.
For sure. But this is where the challenge is. Today, we live in a society where people read in magazines and see on telly fixed systems where they buy something and they get the whole route already given to them. It's some application or a software program or some celebrity diet where it's all in place and all they have to do is follow it mindlessly. And the reality is that so often those systems don't bring all of the results, or they get early results and then they fall off the bandwagon because it's too hard, because it's trying to enforce a system into a client's life that isn't molded to their other life priorities. And then it becomes a problem. So for me, that's one of the biggest challenges, changing this mindset of, I just want the quick, easy fix, to, no, we may need to discuss this. And this may not be a straight route from A to B. It actually might be quite windy because we've got to work around other things that are going on in your life to try and ensure that you adhere. And this comes down to perhaps one of the most important principles in helping people to get in shape and to feel well is consistency. What we don't want is this constant, up and down sort of level of consistency. And they step back a couple of paces. They get some results and they step back. It's much more effective to have slow and steady progress because the person will feel like they are moving constantly in the right direction. And that is more rewarding emotionally and behaviorally than it is to constantly fall back and to slip and make errors.
Yeah, well, mate, the 12-week body transformations, all that sort of stuff is excellent for maybe potentially if you've got an overall, like a short-term objective, like a wedding, people come see you, I need to get fit for this wedding, or I need to look good for this wedding, or they're getting on stage, or if they've got that short-term objective. But like our vision statement at DTS Fitness Education is longevity and pain-free living for everyone. So if you want that,
totally agree.
If you want that longevity, mate, then it's going to be something where you can be consistent and you can maintain over an extended period of time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it's not to discredit or to devalue what people are doing in terms of short-term goals. If someone, like you said, has got a holiday in 2 months and they just want to get in shape for that holiday, we don't want to devalue that because there'll be a lot of good that goes into achieving that objective.
Yeah, 100%.
But what I would say, and I've seen this a lot, particularly in the rise of the physique competition that has become very popular in the last few years, how often do you see somebody just a few weeks after competition where they looked absolutely ripped and so much of that gain is lost because it's an unsustainable position. And again, how often do we see people posting online that they're 3 weeks, 6 weeks out from competition and how awful they feel, but they're focused on the objective. And so this is where we place appearance over well-being. And, my take on things is that we need to put health and well-being first, and looking good follows that when we get those things right. It just doesn't happen in such a reduced period of time. It may take more time to bring all those different elements of our lives into harmony.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, mate. And what I find interesting is that you see people, because you can, with that getting on stage, and you see people who do a solid reverse diet, like they diet out of the of that component where they've been super lean, reverse diet out of it in the correct way, no problem whatsoever. You know what I mean? But you've got to have that thought process where, yes, I am going to peak at this specific point, and then I am going to go back to not a normal, but like a more of a natural state. And then when I'm coming to the next show, potentially, then what I can do is I can prep again, hit the peak, and then if I reverse diet out of it correctly, then there should be no negative attachment to that,
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that comes back to one of the points I made earlier about willpower, that it's a finite thing. And for many people who are prepping for competitions or prepping for the holiday, they've used up so much willpower to get to that point. And of course, it's a success that should be celebrated, but then they kind of run out. And so when the main objective has been hit, then everything kind of just unravels and they don't do what you say, where they reverse diet out and they're carefully coming back to something that's a bit more normal. They tend to just sort of go, yay, I made it. And willpower's gone now. I just need some time out here. And they kind of allow a lot of things to slip. And then that unfortunately leads to a bit of a rebound back towards somewhere where maybe they don't want it to go all that way back.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, mate. So, dude, I suppose it's like with anything, you do it right, good to go. You do it in ways that are not sustainable, then you're going to end up injured, or you're going to end up not in the best position. So, for you, like we talk about the biggest challenge would you say biggest challenge with clients is that consistency, like what you were saying?
I think so. Yeah, it's changing the mindset from quick fix, because so often, I think the statistics that were done just recently in a European survey were that 78%, if I remember right, 78% of people who join a gym or a health club are doing so for the purpose of weight. All right. Now, surely within that, a huge number are about how they look. It's their appearance. It's the outward appearance.
Yeah.
Right. And the outward appearance tends to be only a short-term sustainable goal, rather than actually, I want to do this so that I feel well, so it makes me happy, so that I can enjoy what I'm doing.
Yeah.
and I can play with my kids. I can do all of these other things because I am engaging in behaviors that are sustainable and enjoyable. As soon as the behavior is not sustainable and it stops being enjoyable, it may still be leading you to your objective of looking good, but if it doesn't have those two drivers underneath it, the chances are you're not going to adhere. And then that's the challenge, isn't it, for a trainer, to change people's thought processes from that short-term view of themselves in the mirror to the long-term, I want to feel and live well and enjoy this lifestyle for the long term, not just for 3 months so I look great on the beach.
Yeah, 100%, mate. I think like the overall objective of moving well, like moving without pain, all that sort of stuff. And you can maintain everything. You can be relatively lean. You can be strong. You can run a decent amount of distance. You can jump high. You can punch hard, whatever it may be. If you can sustain that for an extended period, then we tick all the boxes.
But one thing I think I should say there is that to do behaviors and to engage in things that are good for us, sometimes it's not always that every single morning I'm at the gym and I'm, hey, life is great, I'm having a good time. To be honest, I went to the gym this morning. I kind of had to drag myself to the gym. I didn't get the greatest sleep last night. I woke up quite early, and I got my kids off to school and I was like, oh, I need to get to the gym today. And the driver for me wasn't, oh, how good do I look? I know that once I've trained, I'm going to get that boost in endorphins and I'm going to feel better. So I went to the gym, and usually within 10 or 15 minutes of beginning to engage in exercise, I can feel that I'm starting to feel better because I'm moving, I'm loosening my body up, and I had a pretty good session. So sometimes there is the need to apply willpower, but for me, it's in a direction that is going to take me towards something that lifts my emotions, lifts my mood, and the process itself helps me feel better. And so I would say we need to apply that same thought process to sleep, to managing our stress load, to managing our diet, to managing our exercise. When we can learn to love the behaviors that lead us towards good health and well-being and leanness as a byproduct, then it's much easier to sustain them. If those behaviors that we're choosing are always a burden, and we have to not just drag ourselves to start it, but to keep doing it every day, then the chances are you won't stick to it. You really won't.
Yeah, I like that thought process where it's like, yes, you need that initial motivation to get there, but once you've done your training session, it's not as if you need to keep that motivation level high, because it's almost like the behavior naturally leads to feeling better, and so now it's not willpower choosing me to feel better. I have to use a bit of willpower to start, but actually by doing it, I start to feel good. Yeah. And I'd say the same, like if you begin to integrate a couple of relaxation techniques into your day to try and help manage your stress, sometimes you might have to dig yourself out of whatever work you're involved in to go, right, I need to just stop and go and do 10 minutes out in the better later. And as soon as you're outside and you've broken yourself away from work and you're walking in nature, it doesn't take long. You're like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. But how often do we still sit at the desk going, oh, now I'm beating myself up because I didn't take my break and I didn't go outside to get some, natural light. And now I feel even worse and I'm beating myself up because of it. And so we sometimes engage in these behaviors that can be a negative cycle. And so what I'm saying is you might require willpower to initiate a good behavior, but the behavior itself should reflect back a real positive feeling so that we then don't have to work so hard at doing that the next time. And each time we do that, we begin to learn, by doing this, I feel better. And then that becomes a sustainable behavior. Does that make sense? Yeah, I like that. I like that thought process, my mate. That's excellent. And that leads us directly. Nice segue, Ben. Nice segue.
I was trying, yeah.
Leads us directly into question 3. So what are your top 3 things a coach or trainer should focus on for the biggest result? And we've sort of covered a lot of this already, mate. So
we kind of have hit a few.
Yeah, we've hit a few. Top 3 things a trainer or coach should focus on for the biggest result. So that's top 20% of interventions, giving the 80% of result.
Okay, yeah, that is a great question. And if I'm honest, that's the kind of question I have had many, many times from both students that I've taught over the years, as well as clients that I've guided over the years. People always want to know what's the biggest bang for the buck. And unfortunately, the answer, and I'll stand by it, the correct answer to this is it depends. It depends on you and your circumstances. And so the vital thing that I would always do is take a needs analysis of each individual, look at everything that they're doing related to diet or sleep, diet, stress, and exercise. We'll look at all of those behaviors. Then I would also then look at the other important priorities in their life, because clearly family matter, work matters. There's other things that will almost always take priority over some of those things. People tend to screw themselves to be sure that their family are all right, or screw a good behavior so that they can ensure that their work is attended to, you know. So we need to look at all of these things. And once we have them all in place and we can see where the client's strengths are and weaknesses are, only then can we really truly get to what are the real priorities. So if somebody has problems with sleep, then for me, that's going to be a high priority. But you might have a client whose sleep is already really well dialed in. And so that might not be such a high priority for that person. And so we look at the next rock then. Maybe it's nutrition. And we look at their diet and we look at the needs analysis there. And so that's really how I do it. I have them in that order of sleep, diet, stress, then exercise. And then the reality is we then look at the analysis and decide where's the weaknesses, what's the top weakness, that's the one that becomes first in that order. If sleep is dialed in, we drop that one down, we look at nutrition. If that's dialed in, we drop it down, we look at stress, and so on and so on. So that would be the way that I manage those things in trying to support someone in their health goals and in their desire to feel great and look good.
Nice. I like that, mate, because it's, do you know what? I trained a guy once, right? Just the one guy once, right? And just one guy. And this guy was a big old ex-cage fighter, right? And he was a heavy guy.
Yeah.
And I'd speak to him. He had his nutrition, mate, I was like, wow, that is, you're doing great. Mm-hmm. Everything, he was training hard. Everything was good. Stress management, all that. Everything was excellent. But the thing is with him, he liked to go out and drink. And he was like
down in 2,000 calories in beer, you know?
He was crazy. And I said to him, mate, everything is excellent. What you need to do is you're going to have to just cut back on the amount that you drink. And he's like, no, I'll be good. So we used to train at a BJJ club. So I walked into the club one day and I said, hey, mate, how are you getting on? And he just comes up off the mat. He was rolling with a guy and he comes up and he went, I'm under 16 stone. I said, excellent. What have you done differently? And he just took a big pause and he went, stop drinking as much. I said, that's brilliant.
And the reality is in that individual, if all of those things were dialed in, like you say, well, what was the priority? It was to cut back on alcohol because that was the thing that was causing the most pain or the most problem to the objective. And so that's a great example, Ben, of exactly that scenario. Of we can put things in order, but the reality is it has to be adjusted to the needs of the individual. And to just have a system and say it's always this way, it's just not true. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with people whose calorie balance was in check. It was great. But then when we looked at other things, there was things that were not great. I can remember one lady I worked with, when I started working with her, I think she was 19 stone. And for our American friends, that's pretty big. That's probably getting up around, 140 kilos, something like that. And so she had a lot of weight to lose even at that point, but she had been considerably heavier. She'd been another 140 pounds heavier than she was when I met her.
Wow.
And so, and that got me going, what the heck is the backstory here? And as I began talking to her, it turned out that she had been a carer for her mum. Her mum had gone through years of cancer. And during the years that her mum had cancer and she was looking after her, she, of course, had ignored herself and had just constantly put on weight and put on weight and put on weight. And then when her mum died because of cancer, which was terribly tragic, she then was terribly depressed because the whole purpose of her being for the last 7 or 8 years had been caring for her mum, and now it was taken away from her.
Yeah. And
so she continued to overeat and kind of drown her sorrows, I guess, in her bad habits until she realized, I've got to address this. And she kind of had this kind of eureka moment where she knew she had to change. And so what did she attack? She attacked exactly those things for calorie balance that we're always taught about. She attacked exercise and diet. And she had lost huge amounts of weight in the preceding 6 months or the preceding year. And then, but what had happened is she had stalled for the last 3 months and hadn't lost anything.
Yeah.
And she was there and she was really almost emotionally upset when she was speaking to me. And she was saying, I cannot eat any less and I cannot exercise anymore. I'm just broken here. You know, why am I not losing weight? I haven't lost last 3 months. Every week she's going to, one of those group diet experiences where they weigh you publicly in front of everybody. I'm sure we know which ones we're talking about.
Yeah.
she would go every week to that, and she was just couldn't get over it. And they would always, and the ladies would say, well, you hit the number of calories you're supposed to eat, and you're clearly exercising a lot. She was doing 6 days a week with a personal trainer, and she wasn't losing any weight. And so when I did an analysis with her to look at what the calorie balance was, and she was doing somewhere in the region of about 15 to 1900 calories a day of activity. She was really doing a lot.
Wow.
And then she was eating somewhere in the region of 1000 to 1400 calories a day of food. That was it.
Calorie deficit.
There was a calorie deficit in theory. All right. But clearly, when I began to look at the other things, she had a huge stress load. Her sleep really stunk. And the reality was that she was almost eating so little that she was starving herself. And this is why she had got to that point where willpower was ready to crack. Yeah. She just couldn't do it anymore. She was about ready to give up. So I tried to manage some of those other things, to look at the stress load and do some relaxing things that would be restorative. We also tried to do a few things to dial in sleep, but then also I actually got her to introduce a meal, because she was eating first thing in the morning and then nothing till 4 p.m, and then that was it. And so I got her to introduce a meal after her morning exercise. And I can remember her saying to me very clearly, if I put on a single pound because you've made me eat more food, I'm coming for you. So I was a bit, whoa, okay.
And with a big lady like that, you want to be careful as well, mate.
She's a strong big lady too. So, and the reality is 2 weeks later, she'd done a diet diary again. We'd sort of reset and looked at things, and she'd lost weight. It was the first time she'd lost weight, but she was eating more calories. And actually, I got her to reduce her exercise as well. She was doing 6 days a week, and on the Saturday, she was doing this massive big circuit class thing that went on for an hour and a half. So I actually got her to add a rest day in and increase in a meal, and she started to lose weight again. Why? Because the stress load on her body was reduced.
Yeah.
So we were looking at a different factor that she hadn't factored in. And this is my point, is that we might look at the books and look at the scales and look at the numbers, and it all looks like it should be working. But what we cannot do is beat the biological systems that are trying to help someone survive. And the stress load on this lady was extreme, and her body was desperately trying to survive, but she was just not thinking about the impact that all of those other things were having upon her. And so when we just said, let's dial some of these very extreme behaviors back, let's not overeat, undereat to an extreme that is a stressor. Let's not exercise to an extreme that is a stressor. Let's dial those things back in so your body has time to restore. Well, guess what? It was more than... And she began to move in the right direction again. So that's an example of exactly that process of trying to say, we need to see what the priority is. And if we manage the priority and allow some of those other behaviors just to be tempered, sometimes things come good.
That's fantastic, mate. And I think, you know what? I really like the thought process where it's the body is a fantastic mechanism that wants to heal itself. All we have to do is create the environment.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And I think that's brilliant, mate. If you look at all those different components, I think that's very, very cool stuff. All right. So what's the number one thing a client or an end user can focus on to keep on track?
I suppose in some ways we've kind of discussed this in terms of priorities, but I don't want to just repeat that again. I think something that we can think about here is we often hear people talk about trying to keep life in balance. And when you try to think about that, the term balance, if you think of a scale up and down, means everything is level. Now, when I look at that and I think of this idea of balance, I go, well, is my sleep in balance with my exercise? Is my diet in balance? Is my stress in balance? Is my work life in balance? And when you try to keep everything balanced, so if you think of this idea of trying to balance on a rail or something like that you're walking on, it's very, very hard. And it only takes tiny shifts for balance to move and for it to feel like things are falling down. So I don't really like this concept of balance. I prefer the concept of harmony. All right. And that is, if you think of a choir, you have different voices, you have bass and tenor and altos and sopranos. You have all these different voices that sing often at different times to make things sound and work beautifully. And so what I look at then with that is to say, that one of the greatest things to help clients focus on staying on track is to understand the principle of harmony in life, not the principle of balance. All right. If we look at, instead of it being 4 different voices or different parts of a choir, and we say, well, what we're looking at is different parts of managing our overall biology. And we're identifying, right, well, actually, in this particular part or this particular month, the issue is managing stress. So stress is the louder voice in this current management system. But it isn't always going to be that way. after this month and after we have achieved a few changes in behavior, the harmony has to shift in order for things to still sound beautiful. We're going to shift that a little bit and focus on cleaning up some of your diet. And this is kind of what I'm getting at, is when clients understand this need to harmonize their behaviors, that they may sometimes do more in one area and less in another, and then that may change to adapt to the client, then I think you can get the greatest successes, because the human body is changing. Our lives are changing. So for example, Ben, maybe right now you may be very relaxed, life is great, things are good, you feel like you've got your diet working and stress isn't really a factor.
Exactly, that's exactly where I am.
Brilliant. But then next month, not to tempt fate, but let's say next month a great tragedy happens in your life and suddenly stress goes through the roof. I have to be adaptable in that scenario to go, right, you know what? What I was doing last month is not going to work this month because I was really kicking ass on my training. But now that stress has gone through the roof because of this tragedy, I have to dial back my training and increase my stress management behaviors. And by doing that, we help our body stay in harmony with the reality of our lives. And for me, I think it takes time to help, clients and members understand that principle. But once they get it and they realize that there isn't a program that must be followed on that route and no other way, but it's about adjusting and adapting, it actually becomes a much more enjoyable process. So last week I went to the gym and I wasn't just feeling tired, but I was feeling, it was the end of the week. I was feeling jaded physically. And so when I came into the gym, I knew what I should have been doing, but guess what? I totally adapted it. I downgraded the weights I was lifting. I'd spent more time on mobility because my body was just saying, you need to just do a bit less today. And so it became more of a restorative session and less of a thrashing. But too often we think like, willpower, I have to do this. This is on my program plan. And boom, I'm going in there anyway. And a tired, stressed body then just gets battered some more. And that's not adapting. That's not harmonizing. That is forcing things through a system that is desperate for you to let it go. And so we have to adjust. Does that sort of make sense, that harmony thought process?
I really like that, mate. I like that. Like, instead of using the word balance, then I like that harmony. That really speaks to me. That I think that's pretty cool. We say balance and counterbalance. Mm-hmm. So if you think of life like a seesaw, sometimes the stress comes up, the stress goes down. It's like both sides move. Yeah, that's the balance and counterbalance. What you don't want is one side with like somebody who's heavier than the other just being like, boo, that's no fun. You know what I mean? You just sat on the seesaw, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I think that's cool.
The key is when the seesaw shifts is that we have to adjust the other things that we're trying to manage. We need to keep it in harmony. There has to be highs and lows or it doesn't sound good.
I like it. I like that, mate. I like that thought process. That's cool. All right, mates. That's fantastic. So, Ben, what's been going on with you? What's happening in the world of Ben Pratt?
Well, lots of things. I mean, I work for a company that builds online education, a bit like you guys at DTS. And so for me, always looking at new angles and new ways to try and teach and to help and to support people. Obviously, we mentioned right at the start, I think, that I also host a podcast, which you were a guest on quite some time ago. And,
obviously the best one, Ben. That was absolutely the best one.
You were one of my early guests, set the stall out early. But we've done a whole series and we're now beginning our second series on the podcast. So that's called the Fit to Succeed podcast, if anybody's interested in listening. And again, we've got some great guests coming up, as I imagine you guys do as well at DTS. But perhaps the big nugget, perhaps just to point out there, you mentioned earlier that we have produced and put together a sleep course that we released this year. And as I believe it's a unique niche area that many people are ignoring. Yet, as I've already stressed in this podcast, how important the area of sleep is. Well, we put together a full certification online that you can take where you learn the physiology of sleep, you learn the statistical need for it. You also learn about why exercise and recovery from exercise. We look at a lot of the analysis tools of how a fit pro can actually analyze somebody's sleep without having to take them down to the local sleep laboratory to do that. And then we have a whole range of good strategies to help people remember and to adapt and to adjust their needs to ensure that sleep improves so that everything else in life starts to feel better. And so we feel that personal trainers and fitness professionals are really well placed because they're already out in the community helping people with their lifestyle, with their fitness and their health goals. So why not also help them with sleep? Otherwise, what tends to happen is people don't ever see anybody about their sleep until they have a problem. And then they go to their doctor and the doctor prescribes some pills, or they get sent to a sleep lab to then be assessed. By that point, it's already too far down the road and it can be very, very difficult to get back. Whereas if you are working with a trainer who is already that way inclined, he's focused on that, then you can act very preventatively to ensure that your sleep doesn't become a problem. And
Nice.
that's kind of our mindset with that course. And so we're excited to have it out there, and we'd be more than happy to to hook up with your listeners and to offer a small discount to anybody who would be interested in doing that. I'll share you a discount code, Ben, and you can share it with the listeners.
Fantastic. And what we'll do is, Ben, we'll put the link to the podcast and we'll put the link to the course. We'll put that in the description of the podcast as well, my mate.
Yeah, sounds great.
Fantastic. Doing big things. Big things are popping, Ben. Big things are popping. Apparently that's what the kids are saying, but I don't know. So now, Ben, now is the time. Now is the time. This is the moment you have been waiting for. It is questions that matter. Now, for all the listeners out there, Ben has 5 children.
Thank you.
I gave up after 2, and I didn't even birth them. You know what I mean? So 5 is a significant number. Now, the question for you, Ben, is going to be a dads in fitness question. A dads in fitness. What would be your top tip for anybody who's involved in health and fitness and is a dad? What would be the top tip for those people out there?
I mean, that's a great question. I can remember when my first 2 kids were born, and I was still working the grindstone, doing shifts, having to open gyms and close gyms, and having to do my PT at all kind of random hours. Unfortunately, they tend to be unsociable hours. When everyone else is free, you have to work. And so I recall those days well, and recall, if I'm honest, what a burden that was on my wife as she was trying to manage the kids as I was having to work all those unusual hours. And so there's no doubt that can be a challenge. I would say, though, that you need to try and find a way to adapt to the routine of life. Because one of the key things with kids is that kids, when they're young, definitely need routine. And that isn't just getting them up, getting them to school. It's also the nighttime process and getting them to the bed. And so you got to find ways around that so that you can play a role in your kid's life, but without ruining their routine. And I've seen parents who are so keen to, spend time with their kids that even though their shifts are out, they'll hold the kids up at night until dad gets home so they can say hello and spend some time with them. And I'm not sure that that's the best behavior for the children. I would say that what we need to do is ensure that you optimize your free time when your kids are young and spend time with them. And too often we sort of look at it and go, right, today's my day off, or I don't have to work till this time. And we end up just focusing on all the other garbage, I guess, that fills our lives outside of just our family and work. And we don't optimize that time. And so I would encourage that for sure, to say, right, when you're off, if you can spend time with your kids, do so and enjoy that time and make it, an opportunity to stay connected to them, because there'll be many, many hours when you are not able to do so because you're having to work in unsociable hours. So yeah, that would be my thought with regards to dads in fitness. Make the time that you do have count, and you'll have times when the kids are not about and you can focus on all the other things that matter to you, but don't waste that time when you do have it where your lives coincide. Make sure you optimize it. Nice.
Ben, thank you very much for that insight and all the insights that you've had, that you've given us on the podcast today. And I'm going to finish it, Ben. I'm going to finish it with a go Ben Pratt!
I feel like I should reciprocate, but I won't outdo you.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Cheers, pal.
Hey, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks for your time, Ben.
Did you know that DTS Fitness Education are actually an education company? That's right. So if you like what you see and you would like a little more, go to dtsfitnesseducation.com and check out our live and online courses.